Questions without notice. Are there any questions? I give the order. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition. I give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Of course, the Prime Minister's reference to Labor's economic illiteracy shouldn't pass anyone's mind today, and I'm sure we'll be reminded of that tonight. Mr Speaker, I refer to the decision taken by the Labor government on a Jewish holy day to stop recognising Israel's capital of West Jerusalem.
Order. The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. I'll just get them to restart the clock. It hadn't started when he had begun his question. I give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to the decision taken by the Labor government on a Jewish holy day to stop recognising Israel's capital of West Jerusalem, a decision which deeply offended our closest ally in the Middle East and the Jewish community in Australia, but which was praised by two violent terrorist groups. Has the Prime Minister spoken to or communicated with the Israeli Prime Minister and offered an apology?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Australia was among the first countries to formally recognise Israel under Prime Minister Ben Chifley, and it occurred when Doc Evatt was head of the United Nations. Australia is and will remain a steadfast friend of Israel. We have reaffirmed Australia's previous long-standing and bipartisan position that Jerusalem is a final status issue that should be resolved as part of peace negotiations between Israel and the Palestinian people. The same position that is held by the United Kingdom, by France, by Germany, by Spain, by Japan, by South Korea, by Singapore, by New Zealand, by Canada. The same position that was held by John Howard, the same position that was held by Tony Abbott, the same position that was held—
Order. The Prime Minister will pause. The Prime Minister is just 1 minute into the question. I'll call the Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Well, on relevance, Mr Speaker, the Israeli Prime Minister has criticised this Prime Minister and this decision of government—
Resume your seat. If you are taking a point of order, you must state the point of order, not add extra to the question. I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. The same position that was held by Menzies, Holt, Gorton, Fraser, Howard, the same position that was held by Tony Abbott, the same position that was held by Malcolm Turnbull, the same position that they sat there up until 2018 and held. And what happened in 2018 was there was a by-election held in the electorate of Wentworth, and they said that they would change what had been a bipartisan position since the creation of Israel in 1948. They said that, but once they got through the election, they didn't follow it through. They didn't follow it through. They didn't move the Australian embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. At least, say what you like about Donald Trump, at least he followed it through. At least he followed through the position. Those opposite did not. Those opposite did not, thereby showing that this was not a decision of substance, it was a decision of gesture. What we need in the Middle East to secure peace is substance, not gestures. We need peace in the Middle East to be based upon a two-state solution, which recognises the right of Israel to exist in secure borders and also recognises the rights of the Palestinian people. My government will not waver in our support of Israel or of the Jewish community in Australia. We also are unwavering supporters of the rights of the Palestinian people. What we need is a solution to the Middle East, not playing domestic politics during a by-election in order to secure a so-called advantage.
Order. I give the call to the member for Bruce.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. At the last election, Australians sent a strong message that they wanted action to get wages moving, get more Australians skills and training and tackle the rising cost of living. How is the Albanese Labor government's first budget cleaning up the mess that the government inherited and delivering on what Australians voted for?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Very much. I thank the member for Bruce for his question
on my left.
about the budget on Budget Day. On budget day. Those opposite wasted a decade, but we are not wasting a day. And in tonight's budget, you will see being delivered what Australians voted for. Cheaper childcare, cheaper medicines, paid parental leave, more affordable housing, fee-free TAFE, a responsible budget, right for the times and ready for the future.
We'll cease interjecting.
These reforms take pressure off family budgets without adding to inflation. Now, Australians have been waiting.
Members on my left will cease interjecting. Member for Groom.
Australians have been waiting for a responsible reforming budget for a decade, and tonight they will see one. After 9 years of deliberately keeping wages low, we're getting wages moving again. You'll see some more action on that at the end of the week. After 9 years of division and denial and dysfunction on energy policy, we're lifting Australia's ambitions on climate change and we're investing in renewable energy. After 9 years of telling Australia's manufacturers to leave the country, we want a future made in Australia and will support manufacturers in this country. After 9 years of shameful neglect in aged care, we're taking action to fix the crisis. After 9 years of sordid scandals from those opposite, we're going to have a National Anti-Corruption Commission funded in this budget. After 9 years also, we're working to bring Australians together. That's why we did the Jobs and Skills Summit, to move towards having solutions, not look towards just having arguments. Those opposite were obsessed by conflict, trying to divide people. They acted like an opposition in exile while they were on the government benches. And now what's very clear is that they've learnt absolutely nothing. Just before question time, we were dealing with the childcare legislation, and those opposite are just beside themselves, saying we weren't listening. Well, they attacked it the whole way through, and then they said, "Oh, but maybe we won't oppose it." Well, they should get out of the way, because what you'll see from tonight's budget is a responsible budget that takes pressure off the cost of living, that is family-friendly without putting pressure on inflation.
Order. There is far too much noise on my left and right. I'm going to give the call to the leader of the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. I'd like to ask her to be heard in silence.
My question is to the Minister for Energy and Climate Change. On 97 occasions prior to the election, the Labor Party promised to cut electricity bills by $275. Now we are told that prices will increase by up to 50%. Minister, with the energy regulator saying people are using solar fairy lights in their houses and ice bricks in their eskies because they can't afford their power bills, why won't you apologise?
The Deputy Leader will resume her seat. I specifically said I wanted the Deputy Leader heard in silence. There is far too much noise on my right. I cannot hear the question. I'm sure the Minister can't hear the question. I'm going to ask her to state the question again. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Minister for Energy and Climate Change. On 97 occasions prior to the election, the Labor Party promised to cut electricity bills by $275. Now we are told that prices will increase by 50%. Minister, with the energy regulator saying people are using fairy lights in their houses and ice bricks in their eskies because they can't afford their power bills, will you apologise to struggling Australians for shamelessly misleading them?
I give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Sir Dixon.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And I can confirm that the Australian Energy Regulator is advising ministers, federal and state, that the energy market and energy prices continue to be under pressure because of the war in Ukraine, and also, Mr Speaker, and also because of 10 years of denial and delay.
Members on my right,
4 gigawatts of power came off under them before 4 gigawatts came off and only 1 gigawatt came on.
Order. The Minister has been going for 22 seconds. I haven't given you the call, and when members on my left cease interjecting, I will give the call to the Leader of the Opposition. I give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
It's on relevance, Mr Speaker. The government made a promise of $275.
resume your seat. That is not a point of order. I give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I can also confirm the Australian Energy Regulator gave similar advice to my predecessor, the now Shadow Treasurer, Mr Speaker. Advice that in New South Wales residential prices will go up $227, or for a New South Wales small business, $1,130. But the difference is, Mr Speaker, I can confirm this government will not hide the facts from the Australian people like my predecessor did. I can confirm I won't be changing the law to hide that fact from the Australian people like the member for Hume shamefully did. Shamefully did. I'll also confirm that we'll be getting on with the job of delivering cheaper energy, because the cheapest form of energy is renewable energy, Mr Speaker. We'll be getting on with it like last week when the Prime Minister announced the largest investment in energy by a federal government since Ben Chifley was the Prime Minister of Australia, and he announced the original Snowy Mountain scheme. When the Prime Minister announced the investment in the Mariners Link and in renewable energy in Victoria and Tasmania, Mr Speaker, because we know that we need to upgrade the electricity grid. What did the opposition say about that? The Shadow Minister issued a release saying that this was a sweetheart deal between us and the Victorian government. This was an announcement made by the Prime Minister and I in Hobart with the Liberal Premier of Tasmania, Mr Speaker. With the Liberal Premier of Tasmania, the Shadow Minister said this was a sweetheart deal with Dan Andrews. He wasn't there. I'm not sure where the opposition thinks the Mariners Link goes from Victoria. The Antarctic, maybe, Mr Speaker. I'm really not sure what they think. We don't know what they think about many things. We know what this government's getting on with. The task of rebuilding the energy system in our country after 10 years of denial and delay is what we're getting on with.
Order. I give the call to the member for Hunter.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Regional Development. How is the Albanese Labor government changing policy to deliver for regional Australia, providing fair and transparent investment and building and protecting the infrastructure and services
The member will resume
his
seat. I want to be very clear. I need to hear the questions. There is far too much noise on my left. I'm going to give the call to the member for Hunter. We can keep doing this until we get it right. So I'll give the call to the member for Hunter.
Thank you again, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Regional Development. How is the Albanese Labor government changing policy to deliver for regional Australia, providing fair and transparent investment and building and protecting the infrastructure and services our communities rely upon?
I give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development, Local.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Well, tonight you will see a budget that delivers for our regions. It will deliver responsible reform for regional programs and delivers on our commitments that we made to regional Australia right the way across this country. The budget will include over 760 initiatives for regional Australia. In my own portfolio, it will include the Bass, Tasman and Tamar highways in Tasmania, freight roads in Western Australia, South Australia and the Northern Territory, Mandalong Road and the Muswellbrook Bypass in the Hunter, jetties up in the Torres Strait, logistics and industrial hubs in Gippsland, in Townsville, I see the member interjecting, and in the Northern Territory, cultural and sporting precincts in Alice and in Kalgoorlie. It will include 2 new regional programs, the Growing Regions programs and the Partnerships and Precincts programs, $1 billion to be invested over the next 3 years into regional communities across this country. The budget, of course, ends the decade of waste and rorts and cleans up the mess that have been left by the Liberal and National Party. It fixes the legacy of infrastructure projects that the previous government announced with great fanfare but was actually unable to deliver. It ends the mess of grants programs that we saw rampant politicisation and deserving communities across this country miss out. And it cleans up projects dating back to 2016 that remain undelivered and uncontracted and in some cases without any proponent. Unlike the National Party, we don't believe that regions are only worthy of funding if they elect a National Party member. Our fairer and transparent regional investments will make sure they are delivered across the country.
Leader of the
we know
Nationals
that
will
it
cease
isn't only
interjecting.
grants and infrastructure that matters to our regions. Every single portfolio has a role to play. And that's why the budget tonight will deliver amongst the largest investment in regional communications that we have seen, along with powering the regions, the Regional First Home Buyer Guarantee, investments in First Nations communities and, of course, defending and protecting the sustainability of the NDIS and Medicare on which our regions so fiercely rely. And through it all, we will, of course, continue to deliver flood and disaster-affected communities with the support that they need, helping them become more resilient and to build back better, something the previous government did not do. This is a budget that delivers for all Australians, and it will certainly be a budget that delivers for our regions.
Before I call the member for Kennedy, I'd like to inform the House in the gallery today is Professor John Langmore AM, the former member for Fraser, which is now known as the division of Fenner, Mr Stuart Henry, the former member for Hasluck, and the Honourable Bernie Ripoll, the former member for the mighty electorate of Oxley. Can I give the call to the welcome to you all. Can I give the call to the member for Kennedy?
To Prime Minister, would you say the Northwest and its mineral province is the homeland of new age energy? Are you aware of Hughenden with Twiggy's giant wind farm and HIPCO's pumped storage hydro, the world-class minerals province of copper, nickel, cadmium, lithium, cobalt, vanadium? Won't a small input of development monies produce billions of dollars of government revenue and, more importantly, real jobs and wealth for working Australians?
The call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much. I thank the member for Kennedy for his question and his ongoing engagement with the government and his strong representation for Queensland's Northwest in particular. And we certainly understand the potential of the Northwest Minerals Province. To go to the specifics in his question, I had a meeting with Andrew Forrest just last week, and he is very passionate, as are other people in the business community, about the opportunities that are there from new critical minerals as well, right around the country. But Northwest Queensland in particular has an extraordinary opportunity to advance. Last month I was very pleased to see the Queensland Government's Energy Jobs Plan, which included the biggest pumped hydro scheme in the world and building transmission infrastructure from Townsville to Hughenden and eventually Mount Isa. As you know, I visited the Hughenden pub with the member for Kennedy twice. That's right, that's twice. You've got to go back there because it's unforgettable in terms of as a location. That new link will spark significant investment along the transmission corridor, like the $2.6 billion Mount James wind farm already proposed for Hughenden, and we look forward to working with the Queensland Government on how we can best support the Queensland Energy Jobs Plan. Just last week as well, the Minister for Resources and I announced the development of a new national critical minerals strategy, which will set out a clear vision for growing our critical minerals sector. Critical minerals, including rare earths, are crucial components in batteries, electric vehicles and solar panels, and Australia has some of the largest reserves. Since we were elected, the government's committed $100 million to directly support new critical minerals projects, including Alpha, HPA, EQ Resources and Lava Blue in Queensland, and will also invest $1 billion in resources value-adding and mining science through the National Reconstruction Fund. And I think many of the proposed initiatives in Northwest Queensland will be eligible for that and will benefit from this investment. I want to see our critical minerals processed onshore as well. I don't want to see them all shipped off, then the value added and then them imported back. We need to look at ways in which we can value add here, taking advantage of the fact that we can be a renewable energy superpower for the world. That means not only investing in transmission in solar, wind generation, but also developing the regions, including manufacturing in Northwest Queensland, that absolutely hold the key to our clean energy future. And I very much look forward to continuing to work with the member for Kennedy in a constructive fashion.
Give the call to the member for Solomon.
early childhood education. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to make early childhood education more affordable, providing cost of living relief to families and boosting the economy through workforce participation?
The call to the Minister for Early Childhood Education and Minister for Youth.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Solomon for his question. I know that he's very committed to relieving the cost of living for Australians by reducing the cost of early childhood education and care and making sure that children in the electorate of Solomon, for example, particularly First Nations children in the electorate of Solomon, get the very best possible start to life. Access to affordable early childhood education and care is a vital part of a child's early years of development, but it's also critical to our economy, Mr Speaker, and that's why a Labor budget will deliver on our commitment, the commitment that we went to the election with, to make early childhood education and care more affordable for 1.26 million Australian families. Our reforms come after years of inaction from those opposite, with fees going through the roof 41% over the past 8 years. We've listened. We've listened to Australian families. We've listened to parents. We've listened to the mothers who want to go back to work, who want to take on extra hours, who want to have career progression, who want to go back to study. And we are delivering on cost of living relief directly in this family-friendly budget. This is not welfare. It is meaningful economic relief that gives families greater choice. In the words of the Premier, former South Australian Premier and the Director of Thrive by 5, Jay Weatherill, and he says, for our economy, more affordable childcare will help unlock the power of parents' workforce participation, particularly mothers, which would in turn help address the labour shortages we're currently experiencing across the country. And that includes workforce issues in early childhood education and care as well. Now, Treasury estimates that these measures will increase the hours worked by women with young children up to 1.4 million hours per week in 23-24. That's the equivalent of around 37,000 full-time workers. That's going to make a real difference to our economy. We know that these reforms will only be possible if we are retaining, recruiting and training a high-quality early childhood education workforce. And the Albanese government is committed to wage growth, including the critical early childhood education and care workforce. That's why we successfully argued for a pay rise for the lowest paid workers in Australia, and I remind the House that those opposite opposed that. They didn't want that. That's why we're committed to addressing the gender pay gap, and we'll strengthen the ability of the Fair Work Commission to order pay rises for underpaid women workers. But Australians understand this. They understand that we didn't create the challenges ahead of us, but they elected us to take responsibility for addressing them, and that's exactly what we're doing.
I give the call to the Leader of the Nationals.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Energy and Climate Change. How many hectares of prime agricultural land and national parks will be impacted from the construction of 28,000 kilometres of poles and wires in communities as a result of the government's energy policies?
I give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Order. The House will come to order. The Minister will be heard in silence, just like the Deputy Leader was. The Leader was heard in silence.
Well, Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question. In relation to the announcement made by the Prime Minister and I last week, Mariners Link goes under the Bass Strait. So that's the biggest investment we've made in transmission, and we will be working with.
Just members on my right. I'll give the call. Order. The member for Kingswood Smith is not helping. I'll give the call to the Leader of the Nationals on a point of order.
Relevance. Members on my right. I give the call to the Leader of the Nationals, who is rising on a point of order. Relevance, Mr Speaker. The question.
Order.
The question was very tight. It was around poles and wires and the 28,000 kilometres of them. That is above ground, not below it, just to help him out.
The Minister is 20 seconds into his answer. He's Order on my left. The manager of opposition business will cease interjecting. So will the leader of the Nationals. The minister is entitled to a preamble. I'll ask him to return to the question, and I give the call to the minister.
I do thank the honourable member for his question, Mr Speaker, and I understand his sensitivity, because they talked about Marinus Link for 6 years. We're delivering it in 6 months, Mr Speaker. That's the difference. And Marinus Link is an important link between Tasmania and the mainland, the second and third links, because we believe that Tasmania can become a 200% renewable economy.
The manager of opposition business, it will not be a point on relevance because that's already been taken. I will hear from him.
Mr Speaker, you made a very clear ruling that the minister needed to return to the question. He is ignoring your ruling.
Thank you.
He's talking about
resume your
quite
seat, manager of opposition business. You may resume your seat. Order. The minister is being relevant, and I would like to hear what the minister is saying. If members on my left will cease interjecting, I'll give the call to the minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. More than happy to deal with the issues raised by the opposition because they're important ones. They're important ones, and they're important because Marinus and other transmission projects, which it's connected to, like the North West Transmission Link, which the Prime Minister and I announced with the Premier of Tasmania and the Energy Minister last week, with the Kerang Link in Victoria, which was also announced, as we are working on with other states. And I presume, given the tone of questions from those opposite are very annoyed with the announcements from New South Wales in recent days. Very annoyed by the announcement of the Treasurer and Energy Minister in New South Wales and the Deputy Premier about compensation for above-ground wires that have to be built in New South Wales by the New South Wales government as part of the Rewiring the Nation plans, because we know that transmission is necessary for transition. That is what's necessary. We've made it very clear, Mr Speaker, as part of our election commitment that we will roll out this transmission. But we've also made this clear. We will reform what is known as the RIT-T process, which is the regulatory process for above-ground wires, which they left in place for 9 years, because it is not fit for purpose, is why we will reform it, because it does not provide for adequate compensation for people who are impacted, as the member for Ballarat and the member for Hawke well know and well understand, because they've actually taken the time to engage in these issues. They actually understand these issues, unlike, it appears, the Leader of the National Party.
Will cease interjecting. I give the call to the member for Holt.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer. In the face of growing economic headwinds, what is the importance of a responsible budget?
Give the call to the Assistant Treasurer.
Speaker, I thank the member of Holt for a question, and I want to acknowledge at the outset her many years of representing low-paid workers and attempting to get wage increases for low-paid workers, an aspiration that everybody on this side of the House shares. I'm asked about the importance of having a responsible, well-managed budget. Well, Speaker, the answer is up there in the gallery. I want to acknowledge the students from Albion Park High School in my electorate who have come down to Canberra today to witness the passage of the first Albanese Labor government's budget. The reason that we need a responsible government is there in the gallery. It's about their future, not about our future. It's about ensuring that they inherit a society in which they can put their aspirations and their dreams into practice. Framing a budget in 2022, in October 2022, is not going to be easy. International headwinds are against us. In the United States, in Europe, in Great Britain, we see inflation galloping ahead and we see economies sliding into recession. Australia is better set than most of those economies, but we are not immune. We are not immune to the impacts of what goes on amongst our major trading partners. Of course, it's not just the international economy and the international impacts that is going to make it challenging for us to frame a budget, because we have inherited an absolute fiscal mess from this mob on the other side. An absolute fiscal mess from this mob on the other side. And I hear them shrieking like a mob of political bin chickens scratching around for relevance, but the fact of the matter is $1 trillion worth of debt and the biggest budget deficits that this nation has ever seen.
The member for Groom will cease interjecting.
We will not shrike the responsibility of ensuring we frame a budget for the future of the people here in the Gallery. Our investment in skills, our investment in manufacturing, our investment in education, our investment in energy and a clean energy future will set this country up for the future. And we will also do the hard work that this mob over here couldn't do, and that is ensure we start to pay down the debt and deal with the structural deficit that this mob over here, squawking like political bin chickens, this mob over here left us to fix up. Mr Speaker, the job is tough, but we are good for it. They talk about economic management, but over 9 years did none of it.
Order. The House will come to order. Members on my left, when you cease interjecting, I'll give the call to the member for Fairfax.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question goes to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. On the 10th of October, the Minister said in a speech, we will need to install about 40 7-megawatt wind turbines every single month and more than 22,500-watt solar panels every single day to meet the government's 82% renewables target by 2030. How many wind turbines and solar panels have been installed since you've come to government?
I give the call to order. Members on my right and left, there is far too much noise in the chamber. I will give the call. Member for Barker. The member for Petrie will cease interjecting. When the House comes to order, I'll give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
I really do thank the honourable member for that question, Mr Speaker. I really do, because it gives me an opportunity to remind the honourable member and remind the House of our plans to get us to 82% renewables by 2030, of our plans to reduce emissions by 43% by 2030. And yes, I thank the honourable member for quoting my speeches. He's welcome to do it as much as he likes, Mr Speaker. And I was making the point in that speech. That we have a lot of catching up to do after a decade of denial and delay.
The member for Fairfax.
We are walking out to the crease late in the match, Mr Speaker, because we are making up for a decade of doing nothing when they were in office. So now we have to work faster to reduce emissions by 2030. And yes, those figures I quoted were correct. It underlines the size of the task, and it underlines the size of the task of transmission. And I welcome questions on transmission, because this government has actually delivered a deal with the Government of Tasmania and the Government of Victoria, which they talked about for 6 years, and we delivered in 6 months. And you're going to see more of that type of action tonight and tomorrow and next week as well.
Thank you. I give the call to the member for Newcastle.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering cheaper medicines, and how are life-changing drugs being made available to Australians?
Great question, Chair.
I give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Newcastle for her question, because she was one of dozens of Labor candidates and members who promised at the last election to cut the price of medicines for millions of Australian patients. And, Mr Speaker, tonight we will deliver on that promise. Tonight's budget will deliver the largest ever cut to the price of medicines in the 75-year history of the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme, bringing the maximum co-payment for millions of general patients down from $42.50 to just $30 per script. For households that fill 2 or 3 scripts every month, and there are many of those, Mr Speaker, that will deliver a saving of as much as $300 or even $450 each and every year. It's not just good for their hip pocket at a time of enormous cost of living pressures. We know it's also good for for their health, because almost 1 million Australians every year go without filling a script that their doctor has said is important for their health because they simply can't afford it. Pharmacists tell stories of their customers coming in with a handful of scripts, asking for advice about which script they can go without because they can't afford to fill them all. Well, our delivery of that promise tonight will make that choice redundant for millions of Australians. And on top of this responsible cost of living relief measure, we'll also continue listing life-saving, life-changing medicines onto the PBS. On the weekend, I announced 4 new listings of medicines like that. From next week, around 1,000 skin cancer patients will be able to access Libtayo at PBS prices rather than $144,000 per course of treatment. More than 500 lung cancer patients will access 2 new life-saving, life-changing medicines. But I was especially delighted, Mr Speaker, to be able to announce the listing of Sysvita, the first new treatment in decades for a rare but debilitating condition, X-linked hypophosphatemia, or XLH, which affects more than 200 Australians. I was joined at the announcement by Talia, who's 11, by Noah, who's 12, their families, and Sandy, the president of XLH Australia, an outstanding advocate for her community. Talia has had access to Sysvita on the Community Access Program, and it has completely changed her life. Her family told us about being able to witness her deliver the first 100-metre sprint at her school and how proud they were of that. Noah, who's 12, an avid Crows fan, hasn't had access on the Community Access Program, but for next week he will be able to access this medicine that will give him an enormously different life to what he was facing before this listing. The lives of those families and more than 200 will be profoundly changed by this listing at PBS prices rather than $360,000, which is what this medicine would have cost without the PBS.
Give the call to the member for Longman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Energy and Climate Change. RGS, a proudly Australian-owned and operated manufacturer in my electorate, had a power bill under the coalition of around $39,000 last year. Now, this year their power bill under Labor will spike to around $73,000, an increase of $43,000, just one of the many cost increases seen by businesses in Longman this year. When will the government deliver on its promise to cut power bills?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I'm sure that the figures provided by the honourable member are correct, because they reflect the DMO, the default market offer, which was promulgated in May but hidden by the previous government, which outlined an increase on average of a Queensland small business of energy prices of $705 or 12.8%. That's what the previous government knew about and wilfully misled Queensland businesses, small, medium, large, about, in a matter of fundamental and direct and deliberate dishonesty. And I welcome the fact that honourable members opposite are now somehow interested in energy prices. They weren't very interested when they were changing the law to hide the increase in energy prices for Queensland businesses. Queensland businesses will benefit from our policies to introduce renewable energy and introduce the transmission, which are now apparently the opposition is opposed to, the Integrated Systems Plan, which we are actually getting on and delivering to reduce power prices for businesses in Queensland and around Australia.
Give the call to the member for Hawke.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Social Services. How is the Albanese Labor government strengthening and expanding the paid parental leave scheme? And how will this support Australian families?
Give the call to the Minister for Social Services.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Hawke for his question and recognise that, along with many families, he is acutely aware of both the challenges but also the joys as a result of the recent arrival of baby Macaulay. So take this opportunity to congratulate him. But supporting families is a key plank of the Albanese government's first budget. Increasing paid parental leave was one of the most frequent proposals raised to boost workforce participation at our most recent Jobs and Skills Summit. Because not only does boosting paid parental leave better support families at a time of birth of a newborn baby, but is also critical to supporting women's workforce participation. And of course, the Albanese government has listened and responded in this budget to be delivered tonight, which will include the biggest expansion to paid parental leave since Labor introduced it in 2011. But in addition to this, the government has responded to the calls of many families to make sure that this scheme is both modern, strengthened and actually meets the flexibilities that many families need. And that's why the changes that we will make in the budget tonight will give more than 180,000 families more choice about how they balance work and family. Now, from the 1st of July 2023, we will implement changes to modernise paid parental leave and make it more accessible for both parents. We will move to a single scheme that will allow all parents to access government-paid leave at the same time as employer-paid leave. Currently, this is only available to mums, not dads. We will encourage families to share care with an easier claiming process that will allow either parent to take leave first and removes the assumptions about mothers and fathers being both primary and secondary carers. We will expand the eligibility with a more generous household income test of $350,000, which families can be assessed under if they exceed the individual income test of around $156,000. And then, from the 1st of July 2024, we will add 2 additional weeks a year until the scheme reaches 26 weeks in July 2026. These are positive changes that will make families' lives better. The Albanese government's new paid parental leave scheme will be good for parents, good for kids, good for women, good for employers and good for the economy. This is just one of the many measures that the Albanese government is taking through our budget to make it better, fairer and stronger for Australian families.
Give the call to the member for Clark.
Speaker, my question is to the Housing Minister. Minister, the housing crisis is getting worse, particularly in Tasmania, with increasing homelessness, too little crisis social and supported accommodation, unaffordable rents and unattainable home ownership. Clearly this is not good enough and we need to act now. So will the government commit to working with all levels of government to remedy things and, for starters, to extend the National Rental Affordability Scheme, increase Commonwealth rent assistance and revisit investment property tax reform?
Give a call to the Minister for Housing and Minister for Homelessness and Minister for Small Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Clark for his question. I know that he, like many people in this place, is concerned about those Australians who are struggling to find safe and secure housing, particularly affordable housing at the moment. And certainly we understand that safe and affordable housing is central to the security and dignity of all Australians. We want every Australian to have the security of having a roof over their head, but of course we're dealing with increasing housing affordability costs. Far too many Australians are being hit by increasing rents and far too many Australians are struggling to purchase a home still. And sadly, far too many Australians are facing or at risk of homelessness today. The situation is completely unacceptable, which is why, of course, we've hit the ground running to deliver on our ambitious housing reform agenda that we took to the election. It was a very significant reform right across the housing system. Yeah. Indeed, we want to make it easier for Australians to buy a home. We want to increase the supply of housing to reduce overcrowding and to reduce rents. We want to improve access to social and affordable housing. And we want to address the needs of those who find themselves at risk of homelessness or who are indeed homeless. Importantly, we want to ensure that investments and reforms are both long-term and sustainable. To this end, we've brought forward the start of the Regional First Home Buyer Guarantee to 1 October. And that will allow up to 10,000 eligible Australians into home ownership sooner and help ease the pressure in the rental market in our regions. We've acted quickly to unlock up to $575 million through the National Housing Infrastructure Facility to invest in more social and affordable housing sooner. And of course we're doing that while we wait for the Housing Australia Future Fund, which is our significant $10 billion investment that will build 30,000 new social and affordable homes in the first 5 years.
The Minister will just take a break. I'm going to give the call to the member for Clark on a point of order.
Thank you, Speaker. On relevance, the community is very keen to hear the answer, in particular regarding National Rental Affordability Scheme, or NRAS, Commonwealth Rent Assistance, and whether there's any possibility of investment property tax reform.
Thank the member. The question was broad and the minister is being relevant. I'm listening to her carefully. I'll give a call to the minister.
Thank you, and I thank the member for Clark. We also, of course, want to develop a national housing and homelessness plan, and we do want to work with the other tiers of government. There's no one tier of government that's going to be able to solve this alone. We've had 2 meetings already of state and territory housing ministers. The first that we had in July was the first meeting in almost 5 years because, of course, we inherited a system where those on the other side did very little when it came to housing affordability across this country. We're also going to introduce a National Housing Supply and Affordability Council to ensure that the Commonwealth does play a leadership role in ensuring that housing supply and improving housing affordability. There'll be details on these reforms in the budget tonight. Importantly, initiatives and reforms need to be sustainable and lead to long-term permanent housing for those that need it most. We learned the lesson the hard way from those opposite when we saw important housing programs abolished, like one of the ones the member refers to. It was abolished, of course, by Tony Abbott back in 2014, NRAS. The reforms that we're proposing will be permanently boosting the supply of affordable housing and take pressure off the rental market as well as the social housing problems. When too many Australians don't have a safe place to call home, we can't afford to waste a day, and we absolutely won't.
Good. Give the call to the member for Chisholm.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. Why have Australian wages been stagnant for nearly a decade? What is the Albanese Labor government doing to get wages moving?
Great. Call to the Minister for Employment.
Thanks very much, Speaker. And I thank the member for Chisholm for the question. Somebody who, before she came here, was fighting for people's wages to get moving and continues that fight now she's here as a Member of Parliament. We're delivering this week on exactly what we said we'd do, which was that we would get wages moving after a decade where they had been kept deliberately low. When those opposite and anyone wants to talk about cost of living deals with both prices and wages. And when wages are stagnant, people don't have a chance in being able to keep up. The first action when this government was elected was to put in the submission to the annual wage review. Those opposite were outraged when the Prime Minister during the election campaign answered that one word, absolutely, as to whether he would support pay rises for the lowest paid. But those opposite couldn't even bring themselves to support $1 an hour for the lowest paid. They said it would be economy wrecking. They said it would be a disaster. They said leave it to the experts. And what did the experts say after the government had put in a submission? They agreed and they said absolutely as well. This week we will introduce the Secure Jobs Better Pay Bill. This week we will make sure that we get wages moving for people who rely on the bargaining system as well. Enterprise bargaining has always been the best way to both get wages moving and to be able to get productivity outcomes. Those opposite don't want bargaining. Those opposite don't want to see wages get moving. And why? Because for them it's always been a deliberate design feature to keep wages low. Now, they haven't read the legislation yet. The only words of the legislation they're sure of is the name, Secure Jobs, Better Pay. And that was enough for the Leader of the Opposition to say, vote against it. Can't have that. Secure Jobs, Better Pay was enough for it to be vetoed. And that's because at least they're being consistent. In opposition, they are intending to do exactly what they did in government, which is to suppress wages, to try to prevent wages from going forward, to try to prevent there from being improvements in people's pay. The Leader of the Opposition had a moment of clarity when he said, with reference to the government, they'd been elected to make a bad situation better. Well, he's right. They left us with a bad situation. He's right. Wage stagnation for a decade has been a terrible outcome for households. This government's determined to make that better, and if those opposite don't support Secure Jobs or Better Pay, they should continue on their current course.
give the call to the member for Moncrieff.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Energy and Climate Change. 22,000 small businesses in south-east Queensland, including many businesses in my community, are currently on electricity standing offers. Instead of their electricity bills falling, as you promised, they are set to increase by up to $1,700. Why is the government making the cost of living crisis worse for small business owners?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks again, Mr Speaker. I welcome the honourable member's interest in the energy costs of small business in Queensland. I imagine she was outraged by my predecessor hiding the 12.8% increase in energy prices for Queensland businesses prior to the election. I imagine she is outraged that the minister actually changed the law by signing a regulation to hide this increase, which he was told was inevitable by the Australian Energy Regulator. I'm sure she shares my anger. I'm sure she shares my disrespect. I'm sure she shares my disdain for such an action, to be so fundamentally dishonest to Queensland small businesses, Mr Speaker.
The minister will pause. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
The point of order, Mr Speaker, is it's very clear that all imputations of improper motives to a member are highly disorderly. We keep hearing this, the minister attributing improper motives to the former Minister for Energy. He ought not to do that. What he ought to do is answer—
You may resume your seat. You may resume your seat. It is not a point of order. The minister is being directly relevant regarding the energy costs and energy bills. The question was broad about businesses in south-east Queensland and their rising energy costs. The minister is being directly relevant. I give him the call.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And the honourable member well knows that the plan that we took the election was to take energy to renewables 82% by 2030, to put downward pressure on energy prices, to build the transmission network right across the country. She well knows that's what we went to the election. She also knows that's exactly what we're doing and will continue to do.
I give the call to the member for Gilmore.
My question is to the Minister for Communications. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering on its promise to deliver faster and more reliable broadband, particularly for regional and rural Australia?
I give the call to the Minister for Communications.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Gilmore for her question and for her ongoing advocacy right across the communications portfolio for her constituents. Mr Speaker, the Albanese government was elected on a platform of a better future for all, irrespective of whether you live in our cities, our suburbs or our regions. And we are delivering on our commitments to connect Australian families, businesses and communities better than ever before. Mr Speaker, we are investing $2.4 billion to give an additional 1.5 million premises fibre access to the national broadband network. And what this means is that 90% of homes and businesses in the NBN fixed-line footprint will have access to gigabit speeds by late 2025. And what this includes, Mr Speaker, is full fibre access for more than 660,000 additional homes and businesses in the regions currently relying on copper wire. This will boost the reliability of services and the productivity of our regional businesses and support the changes in the ways we work, study and transact since the pandemic. And what this means, Mr Speaker, is that this additional fibre to the premises connections will deliver an estimated $20 billion uplift in GDP by 2030. And that enables communities and businesses to access faster broadband speeds and support thousands of jobs during the construction phase. But, Mr Speaker, expanding access to optical fibre isn't just about downloads. It's about reliability and it's about resilience. It's about our global competitiveness, and it builds on our delivery of $480 million earlier this year to upgrade the NBN fixed wireless network. And what this means is a more consistent and reliable service for more users in the household. Mr Speaker, not too long ago, I had the pleasure of visiting the farm of Peter and Megan near Withally with the member for Riverina. and it was instructive to note how vital digital connectivity is to the operation of their farming enterprise, which again became all too relevant during the pandemic. But the approach taken by this government, Mr Speaker, stands in stark contrast to the masterclass in economic and technological incompetence by those opposite. Mr Speaker, those opposite rolled out a second-rate copper network beset by delays. They promised to build it for $29 billion.
The Manager of Opposition
it
Business
went up
will
to
cease interjecting.
$41 billion, then $49 billion, and finally came in at a staggering $58 billion, double what they promised. They ordered 60,000 kilometres of new copper, enough to wrap around the planet Earth 1.5 times with taxpayers' money. In contrast, Mr Speaker, we are delivering better connectivity right across Australia.
Members, Mrs. Time has expired. Order. Give the call to the member for Griffith.
My question is to the Minister for Education. As per the letter I sent you in July this year, is the Minister aware that East Brisbane State School stands to be demolished as part of plans to demolish and rebuild the Gabba Stadium to provide an extra 8,000 seats for the 2032 Olympics? With the federal government still considering whether to provide 50% of the funding for the project, do you believe that spending up to $2.5 billion to demolish a growing and thriving public school for a 2-week sporting event is a good use of public funds?
I give the call to the Minister for Education.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I haven't seen the letter, but I'm happy to meet with the member and talk about that in detail.
Order. Members on my left. The House will come to order. I give the call to the member for Swan.
My question is to the Minister for Home Affairs and Cyber Security. What is the government's response to the Medibank cyber incident?
Give the call to the Minister for Home Affairs and Cyber Security.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I really appreciate this question from the member for Swan, an issue that is of great concern to her constituents, to my constituents and to the Australian government. The member might be aware that today Medibank provided an update on the consequences of the breach on their networks and confirmed that cybercriminals have taken more data than was previously reported. And the data that has been taken not just from the AHM and International Student Customer Database, as they had previously thought, but from the broader Medibank systems. So this is really not good news, and it's of great concern to the Australian government. Speaker, one of the reasons why the government is so worried about this is because of the nature of the data that has been held here. In a lot of cyber attacks, our big fears are around identity theft and financial crime, and those are very difficult, complex and important cases. But ultimately, something can usually be done to protect consumers. We can put in place credit monitoring, we can replace ID documents, we can replace bank cards. When it comes to the personal health information of Australians, the damage here is potentially irreparable. Australians who are struggling with mental health conditions, with drug and alcohol addiction, with diseases that carry some shame or embarrassment, they are entitled to keep that information private and confidential. And for a cyber criminal to hang this over the heads of Australians is a dog act. It is scum of the earth, lowest of the low territory. Now, we are taking this incredibly seriously, and the work that is being done is being undertaken by the smartest and toughest people who work for the Australian government. I want to thank the Australian Signals Directorate and the Australian Federal Police on the intensive work that is underway to hunt down the attacker. They are undertaking a very significant operation. The AFP are leading a criminal investigation into this matter. Services Australia and the Department of Health are working to protect the government information that may be exposed here. Services Australia has done an immense amount of work to protect their own network, which of course has an interaction with Medibank as a health insurer. We are putting in place substantial supports to Australians should the worst come to the worst and some of this information be made public. Because of the way that this situation developed over the weekend through Friday and Saturday, on Saturday I asked my department to activate the National Coordination Mechanism to coordinate the work that's being done on Medibank. So as the parliament will know, the NCM was set up by the former government as a crisis response mechanism to deal with the most difficult and complex aspects of managing the pandemic. We are picking up that model. What we can see is that Medibank is just as complex and just as urgent as some of what we dealt with there. The NCM has already met, I believe, 3 times now and will work across state and federal agencies to coordinate the response. And I just say finally, combined with Optus, this is an enormous wake-up call for the country here. Cyber criminals are the thugs of the 21st century, the bag snatchers and the armed robbers. We need to do more as a country to step up, but in the meantime, this government is doing everything it can to protect Australians against this breach.
I give the call to the member for Hughes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Energy and Climate Change. I refer to the recent statement from Alinta Energy Chief Jeff Dimery that retail energy prices will rise a minimum of 35%. Given the fact of rising power prices facing Australian families, when will the government apologise for telling families that this government would cut power bills by $275 for every family?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for the question. And the opposition knows but doesn't like to acknowledge that the Powering Australia plan we took to the Australian people and received a mandate for was very clearly in the documents outlined, and the Deputy Leader of the Opposition knows it because she's attempted to table it, outlines a plan to roll out our renewable energy investments, our transmission, over coming years to 2030, and models the impact of those prices in 2025 and beyond. Not 2022, not 2023, 2025 and beyond. Now, that is the fact, Mr Speaker. Never did the then opposition and our government say we would come into office and we would be able to fix 10 years of delay and denial overnight. These guys, Mr Speaker, these guys—
Order. Members on my left.
Like the rock band. These guys are like the rock band, Mr Speaker, that trashes the hotel room and then complains that the cleaners don't have it spick and span before breakfast, Mr Speaker. These guys trashed the energy market for 10 years, now complaining that we're not cleaning up the mess quick enough. We're the cleaners who've come in when you've trashed the hotel room and we're cleaning your mess and you're complaining we're not doing it fast enough. Well, I think the Australian people have a view about your record and they'll have a view about ours as well.
Order. Order. I give the call to the member for Parramatta.
My question is to the Minister for Skills and Training. How will the Albanese Labor government's investments in the vet sector help to relieve cost of living pressures, tackle the skills shortage crisis the government inherited, and provide Australians with the skills and training they need to harness the jobs and opportunities of the future?
Give the call to the Minister for Skills and Training.
Well, can I firstly thank the member for Parramatta for his question and his long interest in this area of public policy. He understands how important it is to invest in skills, which of course delivers to our economy, to businesses, to workers. And it's of course clear to this government. Upon election, it was clear that we needed to address this matter urgently, and we were very conscious of the fact that the acute skills shortage was as bad as it possibly could be. In fact, the National Skills Commission report, the final Skills Commission report that was only released recently, showed that the occupations on the shortage list had almost doubled in 12 months, from 153 occupations to 286, which really is an indictment on the failure of those opposite to properly plan in the labour market. Now, of course, the pandemic had something to play in relation to shortages, but the reality is so too were some of the policy prescriptions of those opposite, namely the failure to provide any support, JobKeeper or JobSeeker, to hundreds of thousands of visa workers meant that they left the country in droves. That compounded the problem. And of course, so too did the failure to plan for the economy, identify more clearly the existing shortages in the labour force, and also, of course, anticipate the areas of emerging demand. We understood that. It was why the government convened the Jobs and Skills Summit very quickly, convening a meeting of businesses and unions, of state and territory governments, of civil society, working through these issues, discussing and then moving on to respond immediately. And respond we will. For that reason, we've announced the delivery of 180,000 TAFE and VET fee-free places for 2023. That's absolutely critical to supply the skills to the labour market, to those businesses crying out for workers with relevant skills, to those workers who are wanting to have secure employment but need skills in demand. And for that reason, it's absolutely vital that people work together. That's the difference between those on this side, the government now, and the government that we saw before the election. A failure to engage properly with the business community, with unions and with others. That's the reality. Now, the fact is we need to do this, and we'll do this as a matter of urgency. We know, of course, we are seeing the transformation, for example, in the energy sector. That's why we're investing in energy apprenticeships, to make sure that we have the skills and that we are ready for that transformation, working together across government, with employers, with industry, to deliver the skills that our economy, our labour market, this country needs.
Give a call to the member for Sturt.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Energy and Climate Change. 62,000 residential customers and 14,000 small businesses in my state of South Australia are on electricity standing offers. You promised their electricity bills would go down by $275 if Labor was elected. Instead, they have gone up and will continue to go up. When will the government apologise to the people in my state for breaking your promise?
Give a call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I welcome the honourable member's question about apologies. We're still waiting for the apology from those opposite for changing the law in this regulation to hide power price increases from the people of Sturt and from everybody in the national energy market. This regulation signs Angus Taylor, Minister for Industry, Energy and Emissions Reduction. Signed 4 days before the election was called, Mr Speaker. That's what the Australian people deserve an apology for. The Australian people deserve an apology for 10.
And I'll hear from the order on my right. Give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
Question
the Minister's
on
concluded his answer.
Prime Minister has nothing to say.
You don't have the
Has
call.
nothing-
Resume your seat. Resume your seat. Order. I give the call to the member for Bendigo.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories. Minister, many communities across Australia are being impacted by flood, in some areas for the second time this year. What is the government doing to support flood-affected local governments in these areas?
Give the call to the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Bendigo, who is experiencing floods in her own region, and for the work she's done with her community. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank Minister Murray Watt for the work that he has done. Since entering government, we've had multiple natural disasters, we've had agricultural issues, and his swift response in mobilising the ADF and getting payments out so quickly should be congratulated. As a former mayor who experienced 9 declared natural disasters in 4 years, I'm very aware of the important role that local government plays in supporting their communities through disasters, but also into recovery. We're thinking of all those communities, particularly those in and around Lismore, those who have felt multiple floods on numerous occasions already this year. We know you're fatigued, and we know it takes a toll on your communities. The former government stood on the hose of disaster relief payments. They slowed financial assistance down to a trickles to local government. Absolutely. Especially when local governments were struggling to help their communities through very difficult times.
Order.
The Albanese government is providing financial help for...
The Minister will resume her seat. The Manager of Opposition on a point of order.
That was a simply appalling statement, Mr Speaker, and she should be asked to withdraw.
Resume your seat. Order. The Minister's on my right. The Minister was asked a question regarding communities impacted by floods and what is the Minister doing for flood-affected local areas. I asked to return to that question.
Thank you. The Albanese government is providing financial support to people in Victoria, Tasmania and New South Wales affected by extensive and ongoing flooding, and we are doing so quickly. More than 100 local governments have been activated for the disaster recovery allowance since the 14th of September, and a further 30 local government areas have been activated for the Australian Government Disaster Recovery Payment. I've called numerous mayors in flood-affected areas to let them know the Albanese government stands ready to help. As heavy rainfall eases across north-east New South Wales, additional rainfall is now moving down towards the south coast of New South Wales and eastern Victoria. The rain is impacting already saturated landscapes, including many that are already had floods in their areas.
Interjecting.
There is evacuation orders in place for lower North Lismore with multiple emergency warnings across New South Wales. My message is simply, please listen to the authorities, heed their warnings and advice. We are working closely with state and territory governments to support those impacted local government areas and their communities to provide practical and timely on-ground assistance. People in local government areas affected by these floods can access disaster assistance payments through Services Australia. We currently have a bill before Parliament that will transform the former government's failed emergency response fund into a dedicated, ongoing source of funding for natural disaster resilience and risk reduction initiatives. Not only is it important to be there for communities at the time of disasters, it's important to be there to assist them to prepare for what's coming in the future, and that is what the Albanese Labor government is doing.
Give the call to the member for Capricornia.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Energy and Climate Change. Australian Energy Regulator Chairwoman Claire Savage has said the number of households facing bill stress will rise over the next few years as customers are slugged with rapidly increasing electricity costs. What is the government's plan to deal with rising electricity costs?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Our plan to help people with energy costs is to implement our energy policies. That's what we're going to do, Mr Speaker. The previous government promised energy prices of $70 a megawatt hour. If you want to talk about energy prices, we'll talk about it all day. I'm free till 7:30, Mr Speaker. I think the Prime Minister's up for it as well, by all indications. And we're very happy to keep debating this, Mr Speaker. We're very happy to keep explaining our plans. We're very happy to keep pointing out the decade of denial and delay on the other side and the dishonesty of the previous Minister for Energy and Emissions Reduction. We're very happy about this because the energy regulator is pointing out the pressures and strains in the system. She's pointed out that our traditional energy sources are becoming more unreliable. She's made that very clear. She made that very clear today, Mr Speaker, in the Australian Financial Review. And she said this: leaning into the transition and getting the investment in place is the best thing we can do for consumers. Guess that? Guess what? That's what we're doing. Leaning into the transition, getting the investment in place. That's what we were doing last week in a place called Tasmania, which is a state which exists under Liberal Party management, Mr Speaker. That's where we were, making those announcements with the Tasmanian government, working with governments across Australia. And we have another meeting on Friday of Energy Ministers where we'll also be working to implement our policies in close cooperation with the states and territories, because we're getting on with the job, fixing a decade of denial and delay, which you should apologise for.
Give the call to the member for Fraser.
My question is to the Minister for Small Business. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to support small business owners who are facing serious challenges across the country, including those who have been impacted by the ongoing flood disaster?
Good question. Give the call to the Minister for Housing, Minister for Homelessness and the Minister for Small Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and of course I thank the member for Fraser, and I also want to thank him for the work he's been doing in his community in light of recent floods, and also his long-standing commitment to supporting small businesses in his community. We all know that small businesses are indeed the engine room of our nation's economy. They're at the heart of our local communities right across the country, and they employ millions of Australians. But not only do small businesses help put paychecks in people's pockets, Mr Speaker, they contribute more than $430 billion to the nation's economy every single year. But of course, the Albanese Labor government knows that COVID-19 pandemic and ongoing natural disasters have hit our small businesses hard. Right across Australia, including in the member for Fraser's home state and my home state of Tasmania, and of course in New South Wales and Queensland, the recent floods have just been devastating. As we sit here, some people are still bracing themselves to see what can be salvaged. Our thoughts are with them, and of course our support is with them. We've already announced individual relief in states, but of course we've also announced just recently relief for small businesses in my home state of Tasmania, and we are working with the New South Wales and Victorian governments in terms of additional support that may be required for small businesses in those states as they come into the recovery phase. But even for small businesses that have escaped the wild weather, we know that rising inflation and ongoing staff shortages have added to their daily pressures. We've focused on helping them get through these challenges, Mr Speaker. We've already announced that we'll be providing more than $15 million in the budget for small business owners to access free mental health and financial counselling support. It's more than $10.9 million that will go to the new Access for Small Business Owners program and $4 million to continue the Small Business Debt Hotline. We know that this new funding will build on measures that we've already put in place, including $18.6 million to help support small businesses adapt and build resilience through digital technology. We've updated the Commonwealth procurement rules, which mean that small businesses will get a bigger slice of the $70 billion in contracts that the Australian government spends every year, with a 20% target for small businesses of procurement. We've introduced legislation to make unfair contract terms illegal, so that small businesses can negotiate fairer agreement with larger partners. And of course, these measures sit alongside the Albanese government's wider agenda that will benefit small businesses, including our increase in the skilled migration program to address skill shortages, our cheaper childcare that will mean, of course, that more parents will be able to do more hours and work in the small businesses. We'll provide a one-off income credit to older Australians to give them the option to work and keep more of their money, immediately helping to boost the labour market supply. And of course, we're accelerating the delivery of 465,000 additional fee-free TAFE places, with 180,000 to be delivered in 2023. We know that small businesses are vital to Australia and will continue to support them.
Has expired. I give the call to the member for Latrobe.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government. Can the minister explain why the government is committing $2.2 billion to the suburban rail loop, a project which has not been endorsed by Infrastructure Australia and which has been criticised as not being a worthwhile investment by such bodies as the Grattan Institute and the Victorian Auditor General?
Order. The member for Latrobe has asked his question. He remains silent. I give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thank you very much. And can I say that the investment in the suburban rail loop is a once-in-a-generation infrastructure project. We are honouring our election commitment to provide $2.2 billion towards the early works of Suburban Rail East, the first early works of Suburban Rail East. And that project will actually not only just benefit the suburbs of our great city of Melbourne, it will actually benefit Victorian regional communities as well. And let me tell you about that, because what it will in fact actually do, because the Victorian government are making Clayton a super hub, it actually means people who live in Gippsland will actually be able to get to Monash Hospital, to the Children's Hospital, to Monash University, saving 1 hour in a round trip. So it is not just a project for the Victorian suburbs, it is a project for Victoria's regions as well. Now, of course, what we also know is that the detailed business and investment case for Suburban Rail East, released by Victoria last year, demonstrated a benefit-cost ratio of 1.7, meaning for $1.70 would be returned for every single dollar invested. But of course we do know also that suburban rail will be assessed by Infrastructure Australia, and of course under the National Land Transport Act, which you guys seem to ignore that actually exists, that the project will also be subject to rigorous assessment process between the Commonwealth and Victoria. We will respect those processes because that is what a responsible government do. But this is a transformational project for Victoria. We've seen over in Western Australia what Metronet has done. creating new suburbs, creating new community hubs, creating more affordable housing across the entirety of Perth.
Deputy Leader of the
Suburban
Opposition.
Rail will transform the rail network in Victoria in the same way, not just for suburban Victorians, but for people, including in your own electorate, being able to move around much better and be able to actually be able...
The member
well, you should
for
have asked me a
Latrobe.
question about that. Why didn't you ask me a question about that? That this will mean a project that will transform the way in which regional communities also access Victoria, access Melbourne. It is a very important project, and I am proud of the $2.2 billion we're investing in partnership with the Premier of Victoria, Dan Andrews, who we hope to see returned as Premier soon.
Order. Members on my left. Member for Page. I give the call to the member for Lyons.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Why is it important to invest in Australia's future energy needs, and how do recent announcements and policy changes deliver on this priority?
I give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question and his strong support of better renewable energy in Tasmania and links to make it happen. And as I said before, Mr Speaker, I'm pleased to report and confirm to the House that last week the Prime Minister made an announcement of the biggest federal investment in energy since his predecessor Ben Chifley announced the Snowy Mountains scheme. And I'm also pleased to report to the House, Mr Speaker, that every single dollar of that investment goes to renewable energy and renewable energy transmission, Mr Speaker. We're investing in renewable energy zones in Victoria. We're investing in offshore wind in Victoria, which we will make a reality. We're investing in a better connection between Victoria and New South Wales, working in conjunction with both governments. And we're investing in Tasmania as well, Mr Speaker. $1 billion of concessional finance to make Battery of the Nation a reality. Support for the North West Transmission Link, and most importantly of all, the Marinus Link. Now, honourable members would know about the Marinus Link because they've heard about it for 6 years. Like clockwork, every couple of months, the previous government, the previous Prime Minister, the previous Minister will go to Tasmania and they'd make an announcement of a couple of $1 million here, a couple of $1 million there. Last week, this Prime Minister announced $2.5 billion of support to make this project a reality. And what this project means is that Tasmania, which is already at 100% renewable energy, will get to 200% renewable energy and export that energy to the mainland, which is good for Tasmanians, creating jobs, unleashing investment, unleashing jobs and unleashing cheaper renewable energy for all Australians on the national energy market, Mr Speaker. That's why this project is so important. It's so important because there's no transition without transmission, and we understand that on this side of the House. We understand that we are lucky in Australia to have a document called the Integrated Systems Plan, which outlines a roadmap for better transmission. The only problem with the Integrated Systems Plan is that there hasn't been dollars attached to it, hasn't been investment in it. We dealt with that in the then Leader of the Opposition's first budget reply as Leader of the Opposition when he announced Rewiring the Nation, to actually make that transmission a reality. But now we can only make it reality because we are implementing that policy in government. And we continue to be in discussions with other state governments right around the country in relation to Rewiring the Nation. And that fund will be confirmed this evening in the budget. And I look forward to further announcements with the Prime Minister, because we know that the world's climate emergency is Australia's jobs opportunity, with the right policies to seize those opportunities, and that's what we're going to continue to deliver.
Put the call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Given that I've failed to get a single question from those opposite about the budget or the economy, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.